Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest introduced to you now. Seed Oil Scout is a community-driven mobile app bringing transparency to restaurant ingredients nationwide. Over 100,000 scouts have been reporting on restaurant cooking oils and ingredient sourcing for over a year, making for the most complete map of healthy American dining ever made. The app is fantastic, it is very well made, and comes with many cool features, and the website is also very impressive, with a very insightful blog called the SOS blog, so short for Seed Oil Scout, which includes reports from your favorite restaurants and chains and tips for seed oil free dining. Seed Oil Scout's mission is to help people dine fearlessly. Seed Oil Scout, welcome to the show.
Hey, Casey. Yeah, thanks for the intro. Thanks for having me on. Excited to be here.
It's such an honor to have you. The coolest part about this episode is you have to remain anonymous, which I think is fantastic. I was wondering if we needed that voice distorter that they use on 60 Minutes when they interview the Second Up and the drug cartels or something. Do we need to go to that level?
No, not quite. I don't think so. I mean, it's just, I'm kind of in the transition phase where Seed Oil Scout's not paying the rent yet, so I have a full-time job that I don't want them. I don't, it's easier just if I'm quiet about it.
Yeah, no, that's great. I appreciate you even wanting to come on and talk about it due to the circumstances. I was going to ask if there was a particular reason why, but that's great. Somebody on our guest, I wish I could remember the guest. It was a recent episode, mentioned the app. I had never heard of anything like this before, and it was wonderful, dude. To have this as a tool is so incredible to help people understand that, number one, that seed oils are really terrible for you, and number two, that some restaurants are finding other ways around them. They're not just using the cheapest, vegetable oil, seed oil ingredients. And you have provided this resource that's, crowdsourced essentially, where people are doing the work and scouts everywhere reporting on it. It's such a cool concept.
Yeah, no, thank you. I really appreciate that. It's been awesome to see it grow. It's been live for about a year, a little over a year. And it's just been I knew people were going to be really excited about it, but at the beginning, it was very hard because there was just nothing in the app. You know what I mean? So people were like, "Oh yeah, cool app," but there's no restaurants. But now it's gotten rolling a bit. Basically every major city, it's really useful if you travel, right? Every major city has, we can point you somewhere that's probably pretty good. And yeah, I do most of the education and stuff like that on Instagram to try to kind of spread the word. But I do think just alone, for people who have been vocal about this dietary intervention, avoiding seed oils for a long time to their friends and relatives, I think having the mobile app to point to is very helpful. It kind of brings some legitimacy to the broader diet and kind of shows that it's important and that there are really people out there who care about it.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Somebody might not listen to one of their friends, talking about this, but if they see an app with all these people out there who care about this, that's kind of a big deal. So again, I love your work. I think it's super cool, and I really appreciate you coming on to the show today, and we will talk all about your app and seed oils and all kinds of good stuff. But before we get there, you're in New York City, correct?
Yes, I am. That's, part of the app's kind of inspired by trying to live, being in New York City without immediate plans to leave, but trying to kind of live the healthiest lifestyle you can.
Yeah.
That's, I sort of was compelled to build it just because of how much I felt like I needed to dine out socially, especially after COVID. So yeah, it's New York. It's interesting, right? Because while, there are most of the restaurants use seed oils, there are also a ton. We probably have the most restaurants that don't use seed oils too, right? So it's kind of good and bad, right? There's a lot of gems to uncover. There's every week people are finding new restaurants that I didn't even know existed that are, doing the right things in the kitchen and stuff. So yeah, it's been cool. But yeah, I've been in New York for a while.
That's amazing. Can you give us an update on what is going on with the smoke in the city? At the time of this recording, the smoke is crazy gnarly on the East Coast. I trained somebody virtually in Virginia, and she was complaining about smoke and getting headaches. And I'm like, yeah, we're in Utah. We get wildfires all the time. It happens to us as well. And I pulled up the air quality numbers, and it was well over 200. And I was like, okay, do not go outside. That's super high. And I heard that New York was recently ranked the highest that has ever been measured anywhere for air quality index.
Yeah. So starting last Tuesday, I kind of didn't realize it. Like I woke up on Tuesday and like the sun was red, and I just like was like, oh, that's kind of weird and whatever. I kind of went about my day. Then in the evening, it became like it was obvious that something was very wrong, and I googled it. Yeah, and of course, yeah, the wildfires are blowing in from Canada. It resolved pretty much like Friday midday. It pretty much like visually cleared, and I believe now like there. I was actually out of town on the weekend, or over the weekend. I was out on Long Island, but it pretty much cleared. It's like totally back to normal. I think there's a risk of the winds reversing and kind of bring that upon us again. I've experienced that in LA before, but yeah, this was totally new for New York. It was very scary.
That's crazy. Well, and for
Yeah.
people who can work indoors, that's one thing. But I'm thinking, like, what about like all the bike couriers? Like, that's how
Oh God. Yeah.
major stuff gets transported in the city. You're out there exercising in this stuff. Like, what did they do?
No, I know. I saw like I did see like one or two people like biking in a paint respirator. People brought the like vented N95s out. Yeah, it wasn't good though. I think, New York kind of has like a sort of a nihilistic attitude about our health in some ways. I mean? Like people kind of just put up with whatever. I mean, that's why the city's so dirty and like, a lot of young people in New York still like smoke cigarettes and stuff. And the
Oh,
vaping
interesting.
is
Huh.
the vaping is like just out of control, right? So like, there's a lot of people walking around New York all day vaping or smoking cigarettes, and then like you tell them that there's a wildfire, and they're like, "Oh, well, what are you gonna do?"
Wow. All right. Well, I'm glad it's cleared out. Thank you for the update. I really appreciate that. I've heard the
Yeah,
photos
of
when it was
course.
really gnarly are pretty striking. I have yet to see them. I need to go check
It
those
was
out.
wild.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. Okay. So you mentioned California and New York. Where are you from originally?
I'm from New York. Yeah, like outskirts, suburbs of New York City, basically.
Okay.
Um,
Have you always
yeah,
been
good.
interested in health?
Um, I guess I was like a lifelong athlete. Like I played sports, like three sports all throughout high school. I played like college football, and I'd say uh my dad actually was a bodybuilder. So he like kind of in the old school like 80s type of way. So he was very concerned with like certain aspects of health, and he definitely had me like lifting weights and exercising from an extremely young age. So I'd say I was probably more conscious of health than your average person. Um, I think like I started getting more and more into diet really during like COVID. Um, just because COVID was a sort of, I would eat most of my meals out in New York. Like in New York, people, I think in other parts of the country, it's like hard to imagine. Like a lot of people in New York will eat all their meals out, right? Like they'll eat lunch out at like Sweet Green or whatever. And then like dinner, they order from somewhere or they try to meet up with people or something. Um, so like COVID just pulled the rug out on all that, and everyone in New York had to figure out how to cook. Which is sort of, I think, led to me like paying more attention to what I eat. I always like tried my best to eat whole foods and stuff, to the best of my ability. But like I would have like, a year before COVID, I would have probably like went to Chipotle and not realized that they, cook everything in rice bran oil, or understood why that was bad. And I think a big part of that is just because like there's been a lot more education on the internet about it. That's kind of, and some powerful memes have taken hold, which I think is often the best way to kind of spread a message.
Yeah. Okay. So when you were cooking your own meals, was that pretty much like the first time you had to cook at home, essentially?
I mean, I definitely did it on and off, but that was, you know, with that, it was like every meal basically, right? So it was like kind of, I had to like get into a more sustainable routine, and it just caused me to think more about each individual choice, right? Um, and like I was like, okay, like I want to like sear something, or I want to like do this recipe or that, right? Like it's like, okay, well, what oil or fat do I use and why? Right. Which is maybe something I would have never really examined as closely if I wasn't cooking for myself. Um, and yeah, I think that sort of is what nudged me down the rabbit hole of lipid science.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. So in this time, you mentioned you were eating mostly whole foods, but was there any particular diet or particular diets, I mean, up to this day that you have tried that you really enjoy, or for you, is it mostly just kind of whole foods based?
I was probably I definitely ate lower carb back then, and now I'm not as restrictive about it. Um, I don't really, honestly, it hasn't made too much. I don't know. It hasn't been instrumental. I think I always ate fruit. I always ate a lot of like meat, fish. I probably ate more like raw vegetables back then, which I don't really do anymore. Like salads and stuff. Um, but yeah, nothing like too extreme. I would experiment with fasting and stuff a little bit, like before and during COVID, but that was more just like as kind of an experiment. Um, but yeah, nothing too crazy. I never went like full strict keto for a prolonged period of time or anything like that.
Cool. No, it's great to get perspective from people outside of the low carbon ketogenic community, where we find, ourselves and spend all our time. We have, a knowledge of seed oils, and I don't know what other people's perspective is, because all of mine is coming from the low carbohydrate space, and that's where
Right,
people are
right.
talking about it. And so I don't know if the general public kind of knows about this or hears about this. Just out of curiosity, we're definitely a fan of cutting out raw vegetables. What made you decide to do that?
Um, I guess I just got very into um I don't know. I always suspected like just naturally to me is like if someone in the if a human in the wild like as a cave person or whatever like stumbled upon kale, like I don't know if they would try to eat it, right? So it's kind of like, why am I trying to eat it? um I guess, yeah, I just it was always a little bit skeptical that I don't know that like I like ancestral arguments for food, right? Like I kind of a lot of Seed Oil Scout is like trying to find places that cook like, they used to cook a cuisine pre like the boom of industrial foods, right? Like the line where things got bad is basically like the 50s, like the American baby boom. So I kind of like I've sort of even more so recently like fallen in love with like food history, um, ancestral eating. I read like the book Deep Nutrition by Cate Shanahan.
Amazing.
Yeah, I just and so yeah, it's not really like there's not really a good compelling reason to be eating a bunch of raw vegetables, I guess. And I mean, I don't know. They don't. Sometimes they can definitely feel hard to digest.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's again, it's really cool to have that perspective. I love the way you approach it on the app, and we'll talk more about the app here in a second. But I love the way you approach it, where you're not dogmatic about any kind of diet. This is for everybody. And as carnivore coaches, and we follow the carnivore diet, like we like the diet, but we're not the ones screaming at vegans on the corner. You know what I mean? Like we want people to have the options to do whatever you like. And so I just find it fascinating that you just kind of developed this idea on your own that maybe vegetables are not necessarily worth the caloric exchange of even like bending over and picking them up.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, on my own and then kind of it like got backed up by communities like yours. Yeah. And I do think it's important to not be too dogmatic about the diet. Like, again, like I didn't want to make like a very, the app actually is pretty carnivore forward if you like sort of poke around the features, right? Like there's more tagging for like grass-fed beef and grass-finished beef and pastured, pork and stuff like that. But I wanted to make sure there's also like a plant-based filter, right? Like if someone wants to eat plant-based, first, maybe they think it's less healthy, but they feel so strongly about the ethical concerns that that's what they want to do. Like I don't want to, I want to point them to this plant-based lunch that's not soaked in industrial toxins or whatever, like not cooked with crappy oils, right? So I think that's how we kind of turn the most people and make the biggest impact, is to kind of not be too dogmatic about like those types of diet choices. And sitting at the center of all this, I can tell you like the people, the communities that are really against seed oils are like kind of incredibly diverse. It's more diverse than I would have expected. It's not really like it's not exactly who I would have thought, right? Like there's a bunch of like seemingly random communities on the internet that care about it a lot, right? Like, I mean, a big way I found about it was actually like crypto traders and influencers on Twitter really hate seed oils. Right.
Really?
And that's kind of like, yeah. Yeah. That's like a huge thing for like people who are into like Bitcoin, but also just like most crypto. And I think that's like, that kind of comes from like, they almost view seed oils like they view inflation, if that makes sense. Like they're like, the government's inflating our currency, and they're, we don't even, they're inflating the butter by making seed oils. So it's like kind of it's a big thing for them, right? So like, and they, a lot of them are carnivore, especially in the Bitcoin world, but like there's a lot of them that aren't. So there's all these people in like tech and crypto, which is another way I sort of stumbled into it. And my Instagram following, like I did a big collab with Carnivore MD that gave us a ton of followers, but like I have, one of my early supporters was this brand called the Coconut Cult that makes this like unbelievably good coconut, like all natural, like handmade coconut yogurt. And, most of their followers are like plant-based, right? But they just like strive to do like they're not vegans, they're vegetarians, but like they strive to eat like the healthiest and most whole food, non-processed plant-based diet they can, right? So like I'm not trying to alienate any of those people,
It's
like you
fantastic.
said.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
We love that. There was just a debate in the nutrition community where a bunch of plant-based, and vegan people sat down and had a quote unquote debate with some of the carnivore doctors that you would probably know. And it was just a kind debate, and people just shared their ideas. And I don't think anybody in either community doesn't want anything other than that. Let's just share around. And, most of us agree on 95% of all this stuff about healthy eating anyway. We want to build bridges, not, tear them down. And so I really appreciate that you approach it like that with the app, and that, you've learned a few things about nutrition and can construct your own diet in the way that you like. And so I guess that brings me to the question. You mentioned Cate Shanahan, but when did you start hearing about seed oils being something that could be very unhealthy?
Yeah. It was, again, I think in 2021, like at the tail end of COVID, or like mid tail end of COVID. The meme, like the seed oil discourse just kind of it gathered a lot of steam, right? Like there's some influencers on Twitter, obviously Carnivore MD, like people were talking about it on Rogan. And then I don't know, just like I said, the crypto people, and then some other like weird like lifestyle type like groups or podcasts, just like I don't know, just random podcasts I listened to, right? Like they were just, everyone seemed to kind of be talking about it at once. Which, for me, like my background, I'm like, I don't know, I've studied like science and engineering and stuff, not actually computer science, but I figured it was worth investigating, right? Like what's actually here from a scientific perspective. And I found this stuff very compelling. I think something that like something that doctors have a hard time grasping, right, is that like the base case of like our diet should not be like the normal American diet, like the standard American diet, right? It should be like an ancestral whole foods natural diet that humans have been eating since, the dawn of history, right? Like like we should start from there and assume that's like that's the base, and then like make changes and edits to that and improve that, right? But like we shouldn't assume that the norm is what Americans are eating today, because like Americans are so sick and obese and stuff like that. So like when doctors today act like it's crazy to to pose that seed oils are potentially obesogenic and cause all kinds of disease. It's like, well, I mean, if you look at the American populations, like something or things are horribly wrong, right? Like clearly things are like very wrong. So, which means like our diet is likely very wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, but let's blame all the foods that we've had in our evolution for millions of years rather than the things that we changed in our diet in the last like 200. It's so ridiculous. Man, I love
Right, it's
that.
crazy.
This is why in the nutrition field, we love you guys, engineers, scientists that come from different backgrounds. You guys see things so much differently than people that are inside the medical field or the nutrition field. You guys are taught to think a little bit differently. You're taught to question everything. Like if you're right about the same stuff year after year, you're probably not doing the right thing. And there's so little of that in our industry. The more scientists and engineers come in, it's really wonderful, and it really advances the nutrition science and the medical science. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, and it's funny. It's crazy because there's like a ton of value in the scientific research that's already out there, like just diving into it and taking a look. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this guy. His name's Brad Marshall, and it's called the Fire in a Bottle blog.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think he loses a lot of people because it's so the like lipid metabolism and pathways are so complex, and he has to dive into all these like complicated enzyme names and stuff. But he's been uncovering some really cool stuff, and his YouTube videos are really worth checking out. His thesis is sort of that like essentially like our metabolism has been slowing because we're eating less saturated fat. And he just pulls all these like crazy old studies to basically make this like very compelling narrative, right? Like if you take a look at basically our body fat, our adipose tissue, right? Like the breakdown of saturated, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated fat in our adipose tissue, like it's shifted dramatically in the past 20 years, right? And it's perfectly tracked seed oils, right? And so for people who aren't so familiar with that, right, like all seed oils are polyunsaturated fatty acids, and then monounsaturated fatty acids are stuff like olive oil and avocado oil. But like even saturated fats like animal fats and butter have a lot of monounsaturated fat. And then saturated fats would be more like butter and animal fats, right? So like butter and animal fats were, since the basically like for most of human culture, they were the predominant cooking fat and dietary fats, right? So he kind of spells out this like he gracefully tracks that since like the 1950s, the percentage of body fat in Americans, like polyunsaturated fat, has gone from like 4 to 8% all the way up to 20%, which is like exactly what like a diet of 20% soybean oil would lead you to. So yeah, I don't know. It's crazy. There's, I guess what I'm saying is like, there's a lot of value in just like in the existing science that's already been done, just like digging around and, finding interesting patterns and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. Did you ever think in your life you'd be able to come onto podcasts and just do a lipid metabolism clinic? Dude, that was so good.
No, yeah, no, it's crazy. I really have had to, and it's funny how much I've learned since starting the app, which makes me like, it's one of those things where like, I feel like a lot of things are obvious, but I always have to step back and remember to like start from first principles for people who are just getting into it. Because even when I was building the app, so I was pretty determined, but like, I don't think had like that great of an understanding of like the actual like lipid science that is there. And I don't think everyone needs to, right? Like, I think, it's our job to like boil it down into very simple reasons for why like seed oils are bad for you, right? And I mean, if I were to do that now, like I would say the key thing to understand is that like polyunsaturated fats that you find in like large quantities of, say, like nuts, like sunflower seeds, or like peanuts or whatever, right? They've never been consumed by humans before en masse, because it's like basically impossible to do that without essentially an oil refinery, right? Yeah. So basically all sorts of, so those fats are not as stable under heat as saturated fats and monounsaturated fats, and our bodies are not equipped to kind of detect those calories as well. We basically, like, if you eat a bunch of seed oils, your body doesn't really tell you it's full in the way that it would if you were to eat a bunch of, say, like butter or animal fat or even olive oil to like a lesser extent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
So, trying to get it down to simple points, I think, is the important thing.
I love that. I think that translates really well and will help a lot of people who maybe don't have the desire to go any deeper into, look at the mechanisms in those complicated videos and everything that you were mentioning. We've had several guests on the show that are experts in seed oils. Tucker Goodrich, we've had on twice. We just hosted Dr. Chris Knobbe for the second time, and he's the author of the book, The Ancestral Diet Revolution. And that would be a good one for the listener to go back and probably watch on YouTube, because he was putting up some of the graphs that you were mentioning, actually, that show the difference between how all of these diseases and obesity and all these cancers, whatever, they track far better with seed oils than they do even with sugar and carbohydrates. So it's really interesting to think that there's a low carbohydrate movement. And his assertion is low carbohydrate movement is successful because it's inherently low seed oil. It's interesting to contemplate.
Yeah. Yeah. It's wild. There's all sorts of like confounding effects with like looking at dietary studies and stuff like that. It's really like, it's, it's crazy. I mean, so I've had a lot of people, like some people in New York reach out to me who are essentially like they're venture capitalists or like, they founded a company and they have like a private chef and they have concierge doctors, right? And they they like they want to like DM me to ask me what they should like tell their chef to cook because they don't know, right? Like diet is that complicated and that unsettled in like modern science, right? It's really kind of a shame that we can't give people a better like everyone. I guess the thing is though, like everyone wants like an easy formula, and I think people like extreme diets because they kind of you know it feels like you're taking like extreme action towards your health, right? But in reality, I think often the best thing for you is probably some sort of like more moderate approach to things, but like you don't want to be moderate about processed food, right? Like that's like definitely bad and linked with inflammation, stuff like that. So that's kind of I think the key, like uniting insight, where it's like, okay, like yeah, like you can play around with your carbs and see how, because I mean, there's a lot of evidence that like even doing like a keto or low fat diet, it works differently for different people. Like for some people, it's the greatest thing ever. For some people, they struggle with it, right? So like but I guess like from my perspective, the important takeaway would be to like either way you slice it, right? Like be eating quality plant and animal based foods, not like factory sludge.
Yep. Speaking of factory sludge, probably the number one tagged video we ever do on this show. We will tag the How It's Made episode where they did a segment on canola oil. It is disgusting. I've seen it 1,000 times, and every time I watch it, it's just like, how are we putting this bullshit into our bodies? It's so gross.
Yeah, I mean, so I've been doing a little bit more content about that, like process specifically and stuff. Like, yeah, so I mean, hexane is like like the seed oils today aren't even really your grandma's seed oils. Like your grandma's seed oils might have been a little bit better actually because they might have been expeller pressed for the first step, right, to get the oil out of the seed, or even the rice bran. I like to use rice bran as an example because like if you've ever held rice bran, like you can go buy a bag of rice bran and it's like essentially like a dry powder, right? So it's like, how are we getting oil out of that? Right. And the way they do it is they use this solvent called hexane, which is, stated by the EPA to be neurotoxic in humans. It's a gas, so you have to pressurize it, right? So that's what that video is. There's like a chamber of pressurized hexane where they're washing the ground up canola seeds to like that essentially frees the fat from the shells. Because like in say an olive or avocado, you can just centrifuge it, and because like there's water in the pulp, so the oil will just separate out of the pulp in a cold process with no chemicals. But yeah, so like they test there. First of all, there's like no legal like enforcement on extracting all the hexane from the seed oils, right? And it's like super toxic. And they've done studies where they've looked at hexane content in these oils, and like there is definitely some. It's like lower than the accepted amount set by the government, but like why not just eat zero hexane? And that's like just the first step. Like they have to do all this other crazy crap to it, and they end up denaturing the oils and creating a ton of trans fats and stuff like that, and it's bad news.
Yeah, that's crazy. It is quite the process. And isn't like 15 steps?
Yeah, I mean, it's literally like it's an oil refinery, right? So it's like, an oil refineries. If you've seen like photos of them, it's kind of this like mess of like tubes and vats and silos and stuff like that. Like all those are like different steps that they need to do, right? Like they need to like deodorize the oils to get all of the like organic flavor compounds out because most of these seeds are super bitter. They bleach them, all this crazy stuff, and then they need to like pull out all these nasty solvents they use to do that. Yeah, it's crazy. It's like it's people don't understand how much of a difference there is between like butter and vegetable oil from like a process perspective. You know what I mean? Like every healthy fat that we talk about, like you could make in your kitchen if you had like willpower and like something like a a press or so, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like that, like even avocado oil or olive oil or coconut oil, like you could make a little bit of it in your kitchen and it would just be hard, right? Like, or like, but you could churn butter, you could, render tallow, right? But like, you could not, do anything close to, creating seed oils. And a lot of people do ask about, they ask about sesame oil and cold pressed seed oils. A lot of like, with sesame oil, I'd say like, you don't want like most of your calories coming from sesame oil. The reason sesame oil is better is because they don't do all that refining. So it retains like the antioxidants. Um, Antioxidants are like super important to the stability of an oil when you heat it up. They're one of the main reasons. So like vitamin E is an antioxidant. Uh, Olive oil has all these crazy antioxidant molecules, and that's kind of why it's so healthy for you. But that also like prevents the fat from breaking down when you heat it up, right? So like if you're generally the consensus, even like Cate Shanahan is kind of says like, listen, if you want to drizzle some sesame oil on something because you're making like Thai food, or I don't know, you're making like some Asian dish at home and you want to drizzle some, it's not going to kill you, but I wouldn't make it your core source of calories.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really the refined seed oils that are like really, really bad.
Yeah. And Cate does such a good job helping us identify by starting out with the three C's and the three S's. So corn, cottonseed, which was the original one. Once they learned how to harden that, then we created Crisco, crystallized cottonseed is what that stands for. So that was started to be sold in 1911 in the States. Corn, cottonseed, and canola. And then the three S's, sunflower, safflower, and soy oil, which is one of the top ones that we consume. And then there's some other ones as well, like grapeseed, rapeseed. You mentioned the rice bran, sesame would be one. Yeah. So just to kind of reiterate, these seed oils, how they were ever called vegetable oils is ridiculous because there's not one bit of vegetable in any of these. How
No.
any of these were able to be transformed from seeds, which, as you said earlier, contain a minuscule amount of oil. You need a high quantity of them in this crazy process to get to these end products that are then exposed to all of the things you mentioned earlier as to what's going to make these oils oxidize and become free radicals. And that is light, heat, and
Right.
air primarily. Look at all the clear bottles of quote unquote vegetable oil you can see at the grocery store that you're going to throw in a pan and fry your food in. It's disgusting.
Yeah, it's horrible. I mean, you wouldn't even, olive oil is more stable, and people always put it in like, glass, like opaque bottles, ideally glass bottles. It's a wreck. And I mean, it's just like people don't, we've completely lost touch with like our food, or like I call it like the cartoonization of food, or like cartoon food. Like people just view food as like they read the nutrition label and they just think of it as like, oh, this one has protein and this one is fat, right? And like but they think of themselves like a cartoon character, where it's like a virtual thing, you know what I mean? Like they're just eating all these like processed snacks and all this stuff, but it's like it's not really what it looks like, right? Like just because they put a label on there that says like heart healthy vegetable oil, like it doesn't mean anything really. Which is why, you're safest eating stuff that is real food around, like they say, around like the edge of the grocery store, stuff generally that goes bad, and often costs a little more. But yeah, I mean, and I think, so why I built the app, right, is like, I think it's once you get all that, you understand all that, you can like nail your diet at home. Like you can cook great food, right? But like as soon as you want to go out to eat, the restaurant kitchens are basically like a black box. You know what I mean? You have no idea what's going on there generally. So that's kind of who the app is for. That's why I don't do a ton of like education in the app, because it's like generally the audience is people who like wrap their head around the seed oil stuff, and they like now they just want to go out to eat again.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. Okay. Before we get to the app, I want to ask you questions about your own health. Did you
Yeah, sure.
notice, did you have any health issues that you were dealing with, first of all, that getting seed oil out of your diet then improved? And then the second question to follow up with that is, it seems like you were eating out a lot, then you came inside, then you learned about seed oils, you took them out, and then at some point you went back out into restaurants. Did you notice that certain issues started to come back over time?
Yeah, so I don't know. I definitely have like kind of a sensitive gut. I was kind of trying to like hack around to figure out some like gut issues or just like kind of, I don't know, like bloating and feeling sort of like discomfort and like after a lot of meals and stuff like that. And it wasn't anything too serious. Um, but definitely like I noticed like a big change once I started cooking myself, right? It's, you know, everything is, if you do it right, everything is just fresher. And again, like cutting out like the you know, the restaurant situation is really bad, right? So like if you're eating if you're eating if you have no consideration of all this, right? Like a ton of seed oils are just getting onto your plate. If you're not thinking about this, even if it you know, even if you're doing what by all standards would be like healthy, right? Like a lot of these, like, you know, fast casual, like even like better than fast casual sort of places in New York, like there are these chains that I know there's like a place called Westville that comes to mind where everyone's like gets salads and stuff like that. And it's like they use, you know, all their dressings and everything are just like pure seed oils, right? So like you're just getting like huge doses of this stuff. And you know, tons of people like report just it screwing with their gut, and it definitely screws with your gut biome and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I definitely noticed a big improvement from cooking at home. It was noticeable. And I was pretty much, I mean, I didn't quite ever go back to eating at restaurants the way I did before, right? So I didn't, the health really didn't slide back because I think it was like limited enough. And when I was at restaurants, I at least knew like to stay away from like the stuff that really has a ton of crap in it, like all the deep fried stuff, right? Like, but before COVID, I would eat like crispy whatever at the restaurant or deep fried stuff. But like deep fried stuff is worse,
Way
definitely
worse.
worse than garden variety seed oil dish, just because it's been like bubbling and oxidizing for maybe days. So yeah, cutting out fried food, I think is like, you know, I think most people will notice a big like step function there in how they feel afterward, or, you know, how they feel just, you know, all the time, probably, because it's like that stuff is super nasty.
Yeah, it's terrible. I was just thinking when I gave the example of cooking something at home in vegetable oil, frying something at home. At the very least, you're probably going to pitch that. You're not going to save that for a few days. It's not going to be
Right.
on for a greater part of the day. When you're talking about frying vats, like yeah, I think the industry standard is like you shouldn't have the oils in there for more than a week. And I would be shocked if there weren't tons of restaurants out there that are keeping their oils going for even longer than that. It is a
Yeah,
horror show.
there's no rule around that. If funny enough, there's not like a health inspector, like federal or really state rule that you have to change the oil a certain amount of times. And like that science is like really settled. Like there's no doubt that like, you know, like toxic formaldehydes, there's this aldehyde called HNE that's like, and all these free radical compounds and stuff are just getting spit off by these fryers full of seed oils. Like that's totally like bad. That's bad news. You want to stay as far away from you can as the deep fried food.
Yeah, totally. Stories of cooks clothing spontaneously combusting and catching fire as they're being cleaned. It leaves a shellac all over the fry equipment that has to be cleaned off. That is really nasty. There's a disproportionate rate of people that are frying, fry chefs getting lung cancer from this stuff. I mean, for the listener, listen to what he said. He said aldehyde. That is disgusting. If you want more information about that, Nina Teicholz does a great job in her book, The Big Fat Surprise, talking about some of these things that are coming off of these fry vats. And she has a whole chapter on the point that like we congratulate ourselves for getting rid of the trans fats, which we really kind of didn't, and we're probably using
Right.
something way worse by using just normal vegetable oil. It's really scary stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, you know, if you're, you know, the first step is kind of waking up to all this, believing it, wrapping your head around it. I mean, there's definitely some key sources in the American diet that I think are worse than others, right? Like I think fried food and our like heavy use of mayo, like crappy that not fresh made mayo, right? Like is those are two huge sources of it, right? And then I'd say like probably all like boxed prepared processed food is another big thing that like snacks people eat at home and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, at a restaurant, like if you don't eat their salad dressings, their aiolis, and the fried food, and like they're probably still using seed oils on everything else, but like those are, if you're going by weight, like those are probably the biggest sources of the seed oils.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Well, thank you for clarifying all of that. That's very, very helpful, especially when it comes to restaurants. So now let's talk about your app. Were you surprised that this app had not already been available? I'm sure you were seeking something before you thought, you know what, I guess I got to make this.
Um, it made sense kind of why it wasn't built because like, frankly, like I don't think it would have made sense for me to, at the beginning, I don't think anyone would have believed it was a big deal enough to like hire an engineer to go build it, right? Because then you've got to like raise money and you've got to be paying the guy, right? And then you've got to be making a profit soon, right? And you've got investors, blah, 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 right? But like, it made sense because I am an engineer, right? Like I could just, hack on it in my like nights and weekends and stuff. So I think that's like the crux of why I was the one who had to do it. Because I have thought about that for sure, right? It's that's just how it is sometimes, right? Like things, if you look at like dining apps, there's a vegan dining app called Happy Cow. There's like a gluten-free dining app called Find Me Gluten Free. But like after that, there aren't really like specific dining apps. And I'm kind of trying to, I'm trying to help people with stuff beyond seed oils, right? Like if you're, other types of sourcing stuff like, grass-fed meats or wild fish or stuff like that. But yeah, sometimes you just got to roll up your sleeves and get it done.
I love it. No, that's great. What are some of the key features that you really wanted to include in the app?
Yeah. So I mean, the first goal I'd say was like just in every city, every major city, put people within, like maybe say like a 10 or 15-minute drive of a seed oil free restaurant, right? When I first started the app, I thought that most of the reporting would be filed by people going to the app and speaking to the waiters, but I actually like started doing that around New York, and I realized that like I wasn't getting great answers, or they were confused a lot of the times. So what I ended up building was kind of, I call it the auto mailer, but it's this kind of clever way to contact a lot of restaurants via email or Instagram DM. So it essentially, like when you search and tap the restaurant, it scrapes their whole website for an email address, and then with one tap, you can send a template email that is like pretty effective that I wrote, that essentially says you're allergic to XYZ vegetable oils, but you're okay with these healthy fats. Like, what should you avoid on the menu? What are your good options, right? So most of the reports on the app are actually screenshots from the restaurant responding with like a modified menu or a breakdown, right? So there's a rating system in the app, right? Like it's a 1 to 5 rating system, right? So 5 means that there's like no seed oils in the house. They generally know about seed oils and they've like taken a stand. They're like, they're essentially saying like, we don't use seed oils, and that they're marketing off that. 4 is like, you could think of like a high-end like Greek or Italian restaurant that would, maybe only, or a nice French restaurant that only uses butter, or an Italian restaurant that only uses extra virgin olive oil, right? But maybe they have a deep fryer too, but they'll respond with an email something like, if you don't eat anything from the deep fryer, you'd be safe, right? And then 3 is like 3 is where it gets sketchier, where you've got to piece the menu apart. And below 2 is you basically can't enjoy like a normal meal at the restaurant without eating some seed oils. So yeah, I mean, it first and foremost was just letting like a simple way for people to say like, hey, like what's the basic seed oil situation at this restaurant? And then from there, I wanted to also add just like a generic tagging structure for all these other things I've mentioned, right? Like, do they use organic? Do they, are there organic produce options available? Or is the fish wild caught, et cetera? So just those like nice little add-ons. And also like specifically what oils do they use, right? Like some people would rather eat, find a place in their city that cooks with butter as opposed to olive oil. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the core experience.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
yeah.
amazing. So I'm assuming this would be hard to say because I believe the nature of the app itself would self-select to mostly rate the restaurants that do have other options. So could you say like what percentage of restaurants are fives out there versus what percentage of restaurants are ones and twos out there? Is it a vast difference between the two?
I could pull all that data. I'm sure there is some selection bias, but like in New York, people have been reporting a lot of bad reports too.
Cool.
It's like it's pretty even. I mean, I would say most of the reports that come in are bad, actually.
Wow.
It's a lot of people just kind of, I think, they have, it's a lot of people who just have never really bothered to check, and maybe they've been eating at a place and they just assumed it was good, or I don't know. I mean, that's what the beauty of like doing it via email is, that it's like pretty low to shoot shoot some random new restaurant an email. Like I do a lot of, I file a lot of reports in New York still. And like, if I see some, like I follow like food blogs in New York, and if a new restaurant opens up, I just instantly send them an email or a DM and see what they say. Right.
It's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sometimes someone else will like go to the restaurant and, have to correct it or add to it or something like that. But that essentially, like, you can kind of see the full history of all the reports that people have filed from visiting the restaurant there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Okay, how about this? When a restaurant is getting that email, is it actually affecting change? Like I assume if you're in the restaurant industry, you probably I don't know, you probably don't know that much about seed oils. When they get an email that is like, "Wow, this is potentially harming this one person." I wonder if it's harming other people. I wonder if we could make our restaurant a little bit healthier. Is it something that they just are not aware of? Is it affecting any change in any of the restaurants that you're noticing?
So for the time being, well, it's hard to say if I'm affecting the change right there. I have some restaurant owners have reached out to me about switching off of seed oils, and talked about some of the difficulty there. And it is really hard for them from a financial like perspective to do it, mainly also because like the supply chain around seed oils is so robust. Like if you use seed oils at your restaurant, the restaurant supplier can like pump them in and out via a hose, right? Like on the exterior of your restaurant. So it's like far less labor, right? Than let's say if you wanted to like fill your deep fryer with beef tallow, right? Like that's like a whole bunch of labor, and obviously it's more expensive. So I don't know. The emails that I have structured are pretty sneaky, and it kind of makes it more seem like it's like this one-off allergy. Um, I haven't gotten into the raising awareness mode yet. I think what will kind of raise awareness, I think the awareness will come, right? Like there's more, I think it'll be like the sum of all the different companies going at this at once, right? Like Zeke in Austin is a big, well-funded chain that has they're like putting up billboards about seed oils all over Austin. They're expanding into Miami. There's Zero Acre Farms. There's some snack companies and stuff that are like really fighting this fight, and I think it'll just kind of be like a unified thing to move the needle. Unfortunately, like the restaurant industry is just they're very cynical, I think, about like certain stuff like that. And like a restaurant owner just showed me like a pamphlet from a supplier, and to them it says like soybean oil is just it's the ultimate option. It's cheap, it's heart healthy, it's approved by the FDA, right? Like so they just like they think it's sort of nuts, right? Like they because they just look at things so differently, right? Like when you're back there in the kitchen, like you're just trying to get the dishes out, have the diners be happy. They're not really thinking of things from like a health perspective usually.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. It just occurred to me as well. It kind of depends on what you're ordering. Like if you're talking about fry vats and the beef tallow, like we have a burger store up the street that really does do their fries in beef tallow, and they taste really good. I've had them once or twice. They're decent. If you're doing an entire vat of oil, like that would be a huge cost. But if you're talking about like cooking a steak on a top or something with butter, that would probably be a much lower cost. Is that right?
Yeah, totally. But so, I mean, this is why you want to eat at smaller restaurants, right? Like, while it is a lower cost, right? Like it wouldn't cost more than like a dollar or so per plate, right? Like, and hopefully one day they let us just pay an extra dollar to get our food cooked in butter, right? But when you and I talked to someone who owned like a large Italian restaurant, right? Like maybe like 200 seats or so, right? And at that point, they go through so much oil even like what they call the finishing oil used to saute food and stuff like that, as well as like the oil they put on tables, that it just becomes an accounting line item, right? And it's like, okay, like, the like a good olive oil is like 3 to 5 times the price of seed oils, right? And butter's even more expensive. So, this particular restaurant owner was spending like, I think like 50 grand a year on oil, and that was the cheap oil, right? So like if if he was using good oil, he'd be spending $150,000 a year on oil, and because of just the raw size of the restaurant. So it's very easy for someone in that position to just be like, oh, I should just go with the cheaper option, right? And that's how the decisions typically get made. And that's a big reason why you want to eat at like smaller restaurants where they're not seeing this like massive line item where they could, save a bunch of money.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point and a really good tip. What are some other features that you are planning on bringing online onto the app? Like, what's kind of like your wish list of things that you would like to add over time?
Yeah. So one thing I recently launched was called Ask Seed Oil Scout, Ask SOS. It's in the second tab of the app, and it's kind of like a little message board for each individual city. So you can post questions about like where to find, a lot of people are like looking for raw milk or like a good butcher or something in their city, right? So you can sort of ask questions from the local community. So that was a cool launch that, people seem to have been enjoying. I want to have some support for just like shopping, like grocery shopping, butchers, farmers markets, stuff like that. I kind of, at the end of the day, I want it to be like let's say you're living in another city for like a month or 2 weeks, right? Like I want the app to sort of, cover that entirely from the perspective of like healthy, natural eating, right? So I'd say, yeah, like kind of like a shopping layer, a way for people to kind of point out good places to, pick up food, or a good farmer's market in a city, I think would be great. And then, yeah, I probably need to do more work on like just discovery and browsing and, the list view, making it easy to kind of sort and filter for the stuff you're looking for. But, it's the core like seed oil reporting experience has been going great. People, there's like hundreds of reports coming in every week. I try to read all of them actually. But yeah, it's been good. But yeah, there's definitely always more work to be done. It's kind of, I don't want to, I'm trying to be careful and not make the app like too confusing and complicated, right. To new people. So, trying to spend a lot of time just polishing it up too.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. I really appreciate that. I am definitely somebody who makes things way too complicated, not very good at shortening things, or, the website that I built for our business is way too complex and it's way too many pages. The website that you have, it's clean, man. It's really easy to navigate. It's easy to go to where I need to go. It's not too noisy. The blog, as we mentioned in the introduction, is fantastic. Are you writing each of those blog posts?
Yeah, yeah. Some of the, it's a combination. Like some of them are adapted from Twitter posts I did. Some of them are kind of things that I just thought would be, that people were searching for a lot. Like, say like Buffalo. People actually are very interested in the fact that Buffalo Wild Wings uses beef tallow in their fryers. So there's like a blog post about that. I plan on ramping up the blog posts a bit more. I think there's, a lot of education to be done there. Like right now I've been really doing a lot of stuff on Instagram just because it's a great way to like, spread the message to more users. But I think, yeah, writing will be kind of a good thing there. I just, I'm time is my limiter usually because I'm coding and whatever. But hopefully, I hope to transition to Seed Oil Scout full time and be able to kind of ramp these things up a little bit more.
That's amazing. Okay, that's a really good segue to my next question is like, what is your motivation for doing all of this? Like you have a day job, you started this on your own. I mean, just from what you've said and what I would have assumed, this is a lot of work. If you're reading every report, especially, like there's a lot of work that goes into that you're not getting compensated for as far as I know. I didn't have to pay anything to get the app, so I didn't send you any money, dude. I'm sorry. What is your motivation? What do you want to get out of this? Do you think this is going to monetize at some point? How is this going to grow and become your full-time thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, I know it sounds cheesy, but it kind of hasn't even felt like work. It's been so much fun. I know that sounds crazy, but it just I mean, I guess I really do deeply care about the fact that like, um, it's essentially impossible to like eat a meal of like decent food out in your average American city. It also really bothers me being like a very tech forward person that like our food has gotten so much worse over the past like 200 years, right? Like if I went back to like 1750, they might have like, yeah, the bread would taste better. Like that's drives me insane. So I don't know. It's a problem I care deeply about. And yeah, I, it's, it's not monetized yet, but because again, I'm the core engineer, like I'm not burning that much money. Right. So I think it'll get big enough and the enthusiasm's there in the community that like, it should generate some cash based on like, I can provide stuff to the restaurants, like advertising and delivery zones and stuff like that. I'm experimenting with and affiliate marketing and stuff like that. So I don't know. I mean, I guess I've just been getting such a thrill off of like making real change in the world. And, people are constantly DMing me like, thanking me or like, someone will just like it'll be like a Sunday somewhere in like Georgia or something. And someone will be like, found this amazing place on Sea Scout, like had a great lunch, right? Like that. I don't know. I guess that's kind of what keeps me going for now. It's pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, I think, I'll figure out a way to monetize it at some point. But I think the step one has just been like, get the community rolling and get those reports out there. So, it's been a fun ride.
That's amazing, dude. That makes me so happy. A lot of people don't realize, even just with this podcast, like I'm paying for this. I have to do other things in my day so that I can pay to host the thing and all the editing and everything, all the equipment, everything that goes into it. But when you get so lit up about something, it's not really work. It's so much fun. Like this has been such a fun conversation to connect with you. I can't even see your face. I don't even know your first name.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, this has been awesome. And yeah, no, it definitely shows. And, I think that's how we move the needle is you gotta realize what can you offer to the world, I guess. Right. And just try to give it the best you can. And I think you'll be rewarded in the long run.
I couldn't agree more. What a great way to end this podcast. There are, really cool ways to monetize. There are really annoying ways to monetize. I know you'll find the right balance there. I do hope you monetize. I hope it makes you money because it is very well done. It's a great idea. And I couldn't agree more about what you just said. Like if you've got something to share it, get it out there and see what happens. You never know what opportunities are going to come, but nothing will come if you keep your information and your gifts inside. So I absolutely love it.
Totally.
Dude, so cool. This has been such a fun conversation. It's been a joy to host you. Seed Oil Scout, where do you want to go to have people connect with you and your work?
Yeah, so seedoilscout.com or Seed Oil Scout on Instagram is good. It's or Twitter as well. So everything is just Seed Oil Scout or seedoilscout.com or just Google it. Search it in the App Store. We're on iOS and Android. So yeah, and I don't know if anything is wrong in the app, just shoot me a DM. I'll probably read it.
That's fantastic. I did see a tab also on the website for merch. What merchandise do you guys sell?
Oh yeah. So we're selling. I just put some hats out there, a tote bag. Just some people were asking me, and the stuff's organic cotton. It's nice stuff. If you want to kind of support the cause.
Cool. Oh, that's great. So for the listener, let's all go grab some Seed Oil Scout merch. If nothing else, download the app. And again, as a podcast host, I understand how much this means. Go to the App Store and give it a rating and review and make sure it's a really good positive one. So at the very least, this message can get out to more people. It really, really, really does make a difference. So just take the 30 seconds on a walk or whatever to make sure you're leaving a rating or review for the app. Again, dude, so cool to host you. This has been an amazing conversation. So cool to talk to engineers who can break down the science of lipid metabolism as well as you can and come up with a product that is like really, really good and helpful. And again, it's just sharing your gift with the world. So thank you so much for everything that you do. And thank you for taking time out of your very, very busy life to come be on our show today. We really appreciate you.
Yep. Thanks, Casey. Absolutely. Appreciate it as well.
It's been such an honor. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio. As always, thank you so very much for listening to and supporting Boundless Body Radio. It's incredible to see the podcast continue to grow and reach more people from all over. We always love seeing all the comments and feedback that you send in, and frankly, in the last few months, I've actually gotten some of the kindest messages I've ever gotten from listeners of our podcast, and it's just really so overwhelming and humbling, and I'm just so grateful for that. Our intention for Boundless Body Radio was to always put something positive back out in the world and help share a message of health to hopefully improve some lives. And I'm very happy to say that I feel confident that we are accomplishing that mission. We absolutely love connecting with people from all over the world, so please go to myboundlessbody.com and feel free to book a complimentary 30-minute session with us. We love helping people create plans to reach their health goals, but even if it's just to schedule a time to say hello and introduce yourself, or to just have a session where we can bounce ideas off of each other, we would really love to hear from you. Also, be sure to go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review, as it's a great way to help this podcast reach more people. You can also go to our YouTube channel, which I don't often talk about, and subscribe to our show, Boundless Body, where we post all of these full interviews, and I also post some shorter clips taken from these interviews that might highlight something really awesome that one of our podcast guests was talking about. So be sure to go check that out. Thank you again, as always, for listening to Boundless Body Radio. We really appreciate you, the listener, and look forward to many more great episodes to come.